Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cyndy's Friday Forum. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I am the founder. I started Friday Forums, gosh, it's been 5 years ago now, during a time when there was a lot of chaos. And who knew we would come back to this time of chaos? So this is an opportunity for you to come and hear from experts in subjects that you care about. And it's my honor and privilege to bring people to you through the Friday Forums to talk about either business or education or just our lives. So as you're logging in, please put in your name and your location so that my guests, Betsy Ellsworth and Carey Thompson, can know a little bit about you. Betsy is with Edwise Ann Arbor, and Carey is with the Council of Independent Colleges. I want to make sure I get that right. Almost got it right. And as you're coming in, let them know where you're from and your name. Also, let us know, do you know what Strategic Enrollment Management is? Is this a term you have heard? Because this is going to be the topic that we're going to talk about today. And I'm so excited to be able to talk about this. I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. Betsy and I were talking about this several months ago, right? And it's like, oh, I can do that. So, of course, here she is. And I'm so glad to have her. I'm so glad to have Carey here to talk about this because it affects the work we do and it affects the work our students, and it is going to have an impact in the future. So as you can see, we've got people from all over. Welcome. Glad to see all of you. Michelle, Deanne, Jamie, Jeffrey, just Lucia, glad to have you. Stephanie, just all these wonderful people coming in and talking about and wanting to hear more. So, and we can see there's quite a bit of range in terms of knowing what it is, being familiar, not hearing about it, not being sure. I also teach for the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program. It's something we try to cover, but it's often not, there's just not enough time to really cover it in depth. So thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Carey, for being here today. Let's get started and give us a little bit of information about yourselves. Like, how did you get into this? What's your background? Betsy, let's start with you.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. It's not morning here on the East Coast, Cyndy. It's actually mid-afternoon. But anyway, my name's Betsy Ellsworth, and I come to this profession having grown up in education. My parents were educators. I grew up at a boarding school. I taught history and coached for many years. And then I worked at a pretty highly selective college in Portland, Oregon for 10 years in a senior leadership position, left there to come to Ann Arbor for an independent school here where I was the director of admission and financial aid for 12 years and then the director of college counseling for 8 years. And so strategic enrollment management works for independent school admission, probably admission to anything. Right. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And Carey, how about yourself?
Sure, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with all of you. And thank you, Cyndy, for inviting me to participate. I have been in and around liberal arts colleges for 40 years, a little more than 40 years, having started my career as a young admission officer at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. I was Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Center College and Vice President for Enrollment and Communication at Rhodes College in Memphis. And most recently, in fact, have just stepped away from Vice President for Enrollment and Educational Services and Dean of Admission at Gettysburg College. So many years in the field and have many friends. We probably all have friends in common, I'm sure. But have recently stepped away from Gettysburg. It's a grueling job, to be honest. Vice President for Enrollment, especially at a liberal arts college these days. My wife says I'm taller since I stepped away. So I've taken a position with the Council of Independent Colleges just recently, working on a project for them to develop a national career center or career services center. The Council of Independent Colleges has 600 or so institutional members, and they provide a lot of professional development and advocacy on behalf of those members, which are all private independent colleges, although some may be sectarian, I suppose. So it's a great organization, does good work. It's located in Washington, D.C. I'm not far from there. So this sort of makes sense as I figure out what's next in addition to my work with CIC. So, but again, thank you, Cyndy. And Betsy and I are old friends, so it's nice to see her on a Zoom.
We used to travel together with CTCL, right?
We did for a
Did
while, yes. Yeah,
for a
back in the
while.
day.
Yep.
So
And I
explain
should,
what
oh, I'm
CTCL.
sorry, colleges that change lives. And the colleges sort of travel as a posse to different schools and areas around the country. I think we were in the South. We were in like Tennessee
Probably.
or places.
That's
And I
many,
should
many
add,
years ago.
yeah, a long time ago. And I should add that I stepped away from independent schoolwork and opened my own one-person business called Advice Ann Arbor. So I've been doing this independently now for, I think I'm in my third year.
Oh, yeah.
I think my family would say I'm taller too, and certainly much calmer.
Much
Yes,
a little more time, a little more
yes.
Yeah.
spring in your step for sure.
Yep.
So, well, and that I think that's so you both have been in this industry for a really long time. Do you remember when the term strategic enrollment management kind of appeared? What was that like?
I want to say it's been around as a concept since the 70s.
Hmm.
Um, it has become more broadly practiced and understood, I want to say, since the 90s. And over the last 15 to 20 years, I don't know of a college that doesn't think in these terms. Is
Mhm.
that fair, Betsy?
Absolutely. And independent schools are now using directors of enrollment management. When I started, it was, director or dean of admission. And even when I was at Reed, it was still VP, dean of admission, not enrollment management. And that was in the 90s, early 2000s. So I think it
So
took a while for different schools to catch on or for
Yeah.
different presidents of institutions to catch on.
Yes.
Because presidents of institutions, all of them, or headmasters or heads of school or whatever we call all these people now, come with their own different perspectives about what the work is that we all do and how that work should be perceived by the community.
Mhm. So what does that mean? What's the definition of strategic enrollment management?
I think definitions will vary depending a bit on who you're talking to. They'll vary a bit on the type of institution that you're having that conversation with. But I would say it is an attempt by the institution to align resources and weave them together so that the institution is attracting, enrolling, retaining its students, its best fit students over the course of 4 years. So it's not just admission, right? There's a point of admission. And even before that, there's a point of recruitment and so forth. So making sure that all the functional areas of the college are lined up is a big part of enrollment management. It's most closely associated with admission and financial aid, and those are two obviously core functional areas. But it includes institutional research. It includes
Athletics.
uh, athletics, career services, any number of different areas that should not be isolated from each other. So it's an effort to get everybody singing off the same sheet of music, which is hard at a college or university.
And it's this idea, exactly, Carey, and this idea that we're all in this together, that it's not just the point of recruitment and the point of admission, right? It's what happens to those people once they arrive on our campus, and what is that experience like for them? It's not just up to the admission office or the financial aid office to get the kids, and then we just set them loose and who
Right.
cares? So
Well, and I think that's a really important part is to look at it as an over, a long range thing over to meet the institutional needs for that period of time. And that's the part that often gets lost. It's the retention. If you don't recruit and admit the right students, they're not going to stay. And if you don't provide the services, the connections, then they're not going to have a positive experience. I know as a counselor, I've always told my students and families that my job and my role is not to help them get out of high school, it's to help them get into college and to stay there. And that's what strategic enrollment management does. And as you said, Carrie, bringing all these entities together to come be on the same page and play in the same ballpark, that can be
Yeah.
really challenging.
And I left a couple out. See if Betsy can guess which ones I left out. But the finance office is
Mhm.
part of this equation as well, and making sure that all of that works for the financial health of the college. Um, and on the college level, I would say the provost office or vice president for academic affairs is
mhm.
a key component in all this as well. But helping those areas have an external view, and understanding of the market or markets that a college deals with is a big piece of this as well.
And faculty as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that was always the tough thing for me in independent schools, was getting faculty to understand that they're part of this whole process as well, and student experience as well. And getting faculty, whether it be at the college level or the independent school level, high school level, to understand that these things are businesses.
Right.
Right. And faculty really rebel against that. Like, no, 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 I'm a purist. I'm a PhD. I teach politics or computer science, and that's what I do. And that doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah. I used to jokingly refer to myself as the vice president for splainin' stuff. So it was often standing in front of faculty or trustees or staff or students for that matter, helping them understand how all of these things were connected.
Right.
So let's see if I can keep my title by the end of this session today.
You're cracking
Oh,
people up in the comments section.
Well, that's good. That's
it's
good. So far, so good.
true. So you mentioned earlier that, as presidents or people come in, they have priorities. And I know boards have priorities too. So that relates to those institutional priorities. How does that fit into the strategic enrollment management?
You want to take that, Betsy? And
Why don't
I
you
have.
take it? Why don't you jump in? Just again, and part of the reason I was so excited that you were joining is that you've more recently been on the college side than
Sure.
I've been, right? And
Sure.
since this is primarily sort of independent counselors wanting to learn more about the college side, I'm happy to jump in, but for the most part, I think you have the most recent knowledge.
Okay. Well, sure. What so institutional priorities really drive the whole thing. And if the board and the president and the vice president for enrollment aren't on the same page, um, bad things happen. Um, and bad things, and if something bad's going to happen, it usually happens to the vice president for enrollment because they're low man on that totem pole. Um, but having well understood institutional priorities and goals, having all of those people understand what's realistic in the marketplace is a key component of that. So when we talk about and institutional priorities and goals range from generating X dollars in tuition revenue so we can pay everyone
Mhm.
to we need a goalie this year on the women's soccer team. So when we talk about institutional priorities, and I wouldn't expect the board to know, or the president even to know that we needed a goalie on the women's soccer team, but institutional priorities are that broad. Um, and the vice president of enrollment does actually need to know that we need a goalie on the women's soccer team, but also has to understand the net tuition revenue goals of the college because the college has to be financially healthy. Trustees insist on that. They are fiduciarily, is that a word? Responsible um, for the college. So that's their number one priority. Everything has to fit within that. Otherwise, we can't pay people. We can't pay
Mhm.
the faculty. We can't buy books in the library. And colleges take those responsibilities very, very seriously.
And they can be incredibly broad. I mean, I remember a story back in the day when, especially at independent schools, college counselors would be able to call their admission rep at the college and sort of go through the docket of kids. And I had an experience doing that with a college in the South and was running through the docket of kids. And the school said, we're going to admit this kid. And I was like, but that kid's at the bottom of our class. It's not going to be explainable. And the school said, yes, but he's from Vermont. And we need Vermont if we're going to have 50 states represented. So there's a geographic perspective to this as well. And I know, Carey, you'll bring this up. I mean, all of these things are changing this year, right? I used to, if we were talking about this a year ago, I would have talked about gender equity. You're a
Mhm.
co-ed institution. How do you have 65, 70% female, right? And then the rest of the guys, right? And I remember juggling lists to make sure that we had gender parity so that we really were genuinely co-ed on the college side. But that's all changing this year.
It definitely is. Well, and that, the title that we use for this is that it's just SEM is the tip of the iceberg. What you see is very little bit about what's really going underneath. So when we look at that, and you're already unwrapping why that is, because it's not just about admitting the student. It's about finding students who from Vermont or play a saxophone or they've started a new major and so now we've got to get students in this major. I remember that happening here in California at Cal Poly. They opened this major and so they were looking for those students. So how do parents, counselors, students, how do they find out what those institutional priorities are? What kind of questions can they ask?
I think I would never suggest a family not ask direct questions that relate to them. The admission office or officers ought to be able to give them a straight answer. I don't know that families can or counselors can know about all the different institutional priorities that an institution might have. Um, and we're probably not going to, put it on the website that we're looking for a female goalkeeper this year.
Right.
Um, but it's a fair question. If you are a female goalkeeper, you should be able to ask the coach, what are your priorities this year in your recruiting, right? That's so never hesitate to ask those sorts of questions. There are some institutional priorities that are going to be universally true, and I've alluded to a couple of those already, right? You've got to make the money work. You've got to carefully balance the tuition revenue coming in with the financial aid expense going out. Um, You've got to have a diverse class in all the ways that we might think about that. That's become harder in the last few years. We can certainly talk about that, but that may take us down a whole nother path. Um, so, I mean, but those are things that I think are generally true. Colleges want more, typically, in my experience, want more of whatever it is they don't have. So if you observe on a campus a disproportionate number of men versus women or something, it might be, the college is really um, aware of that as well and doing what it can to balance things out. Because again, they want a balanced student body academically. Well, all the different ways you might think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that brings in, that's an interesting point because then that you can look at the profile of a college and then to your point too, Betsy, the student's profile and see how they line up. And that's part of our role too, is to help find that best fit, where they'll thrive and prosper, those kinds of things. But I think that's an important aspect. But so what kind of data can we look at or
You could,
find?
Carey, you are director of institutional research, am I right?
It reported to me.
So at every college is going to have a section institutional research, and every family should go to that piece of the website and just look through the most recent data. You can go and you can find, the most recent strategic plan for the college and look and see sort of what are the strategic planning points that are being made at this institution and how does my child or for counselors, how do the kids I'm working with sort of fit into those strategic plans as you're counseling kids? But I think the institutional research piece is absolutely critical. And you can find so many amazing pieces of data. For example, if you go to the Reed College institutional research page, if you're trying to figure out, how do I get a kid to get excited about this school that doesn't have an athletic program, it's really kind of quirky, all those kinds of things, you will find on the Reed College website all of this data about the production of future PhDs and where Reed falls along with these other schools. And it's really surprising information. So going to that piece of information on a website is where I always take kids.
Oh, I think that's a really good idea.
It's a great point. And uh, Betsy, I couldn't agree more. Looking up the college's strategic plan, if you want to know what their priorities are, that's that's the priority right there. It's really spelled out at the institutional level, and most colleges will have that posted somewhere on their site. The other, and I'm sure everybody in this crowd probably already knows about the Common Data Set, but you can Google Common Data Set for just about any college or university, and there you go. But families don't know that.
Right.
And that may be something that you could share with families and help them interpret it.
It's something I direct all of my families to when we first start meeting, as they're starting to build lists, is talking about the common data set at all these schools. And for example, let's look at where most the departments for which most degrees are conferred, right? And if you have a kid who wants to do biology at Princeton, um, but also is polylingual, or I'm sorry, multilingual, how many degrees are they conferring in French and in Russian and all these other languages? And those become points of identification and how to talk about what it is you want to do. Certainly say biology, but also put down these languages that you speak.
Mhm.
Definitely. Well, and Diana's making a good point that some of the pages, web pages for colleges are pretty transparent. Others, as she says, not so much. Sometimes they really hide their data and research. And this might be where AI or something would be really helpful to do a deep search or something to because and I think your point about looking at the strategic planning the not just the mission statement. Sometimes that's pretty generic and it doesn't really tell you much, but look at what their strategic plan is. And
Mhm.
that can be much more impactful and give you more information.
Yeah,
Um, so you mentioned how these offices, I remember when I first started doing college counseling, actually, I started doing financial aid counseling. I didn't even know there was such a thing as college counseling. So I started doing the financial aid and then one of my clients said, well, can't you help us with applications? Well, sure, I guess. Why not? So, but having the financial, at those times, financial aid offices and admissions offices were totally separate entities. And now they're connected together. And as part of that strategic enrollment management, we hear this term called tuition discount. So explain what that is and how does that factor into making sure the college is fiscally, viable?
sure. This is probably one of the most important topics a vice president for enrollment thinks about, probably thinks about on a daily basis at some level or another. So tuition discounting is exactly what it sounds like. And if let's just to make the math easy, let's say tuition is $100,000, which is probably not actually a crazy number in the foreseeable future. Um, if your discount is 70%, you're giving $70,000 in institutional aid, whether that's merit-based or need-based doesn't really matter. Um, but for whatever reason and combination of reasons, it is worth it for you as an institution to discount um, 70% for a given student. It might be because they're from Vermont. It might be because they are exceptionally academically talented. It might be because they play the oboe, or a combination of things. And it might also be because they have financial need, because most every student, if the cost is $100,000, has financial need.
Mhm.
That means you make $30,000 on that student, right? The institution makes $30,000 and multiply that times four, that's $120,000 over 4 years. So that's the net revenue to the college. Um, um, Discounting is figured um, on the tuition basis. It doesn't normally include room and board. That's largely so colleges can compare themselves to other places. Some places have room and board, some places are commuter schools, some places are everybody lives off campus. But this is a way, a common measure that the sector has just used as its common definition. Um, you may give a 70% discount to one student and a 30%, let's make it a different number, a 40% discount to another student because they have a different set of characteristics. You might give a 100% discount to a certain student because they have a set of characteristics. At the end of the day, you want to average all those up, and that's your institutional tuition discount. So discounting is a tool. It's not an end of itself. It's a tool. And the net result is net tuition revenue, whether it's on the per student basis or in the aggregate. You add all the students up together. If you're practicing strategic enrollment management, you've come to terms with the CFO and the president and the board, and you know how much net tuition revenue you need to run the place. And it's your job, if you're the vice president, to figure out how to reach that financial goal and get the academic profile you want and get the diversity that you want and get the headcount that you want because the faculty need a certain number of students to teach, right? Or maybe we don't need them anymore. That's a painful conversation, right?
Yeah, we
Um,
see that happening right now
so
too.
exactly. So those are all the, those are some of the things you're trying to balance. You're really trying to thread a needle to um, to satisfy various different needs across the institution while maintaining that fiscal responsibility. Um, it's not an evil practice, and you'll read about it in the media these days as perhaps some Machiavellian the Wizard of Oz sort of figure behind the curtain. Um, it does take a lot of research. It takes a lot of statistics. It takes a lot of conversations and takes a lot of balancing um, to line up all those functions to have that end result. I used to, another thing I would say jokingly to the president is, Mr. President, I can get you any one number you want. It's when you want more than one number that this becomes really hard.
Mhm.
So there's a new book out. Some of you probably have heard of it, The Hottest Seat on Campus. Um, there it is right there,
Oh,
Angel Perez,
oh,
uh, and the president of NACAC and good friend. It's a great book in the field, but it gives you a pretty good idea why it's the hottest seat on campus.
oh, wow.
I
Well,
would also argue, and this is maybe sort of a really weird way of thinking and looking at things, but living in Ann Arbor and with a kid who just graduated from college at a small liberal arts and science college in Southern California, um, looking at student newspapers and what stories they're writing, and as admission offices try to balance numbers, there's some schools that have been lucky enough that their yield is higher than they expected. And so they are, in fact, over enrolled. And the impact that that over enrollment has on the local community. And you can sort of learn about those things as counselors getting a sense. I mean, right, you can't ask every family to know that, but as we're learning about colleges and places to recommend and things like that, the University of Michigan has the biggest class ever this year. Does that mean, as a year that they're starting early decision, and we don't know how that's all going to play out, does that mean that they're going to admit way fewer students, have a larger wait list as they try to figure out where to put all these kids? Because people in Ann Arbor locally are not happy. Um, and the same with this small town in Southern California where kids were being housed in apartment buildings that were 5 miles from campus,
mhm.
right? And how to enrage, parents. That's one really quick way to do it.
One way to do it. One,
Well,
one thing I would one thing I would add just for clarification, most of what I just talked about in terms of arraying discounts across an admitted applicant pool, most of that really just applies to the private sector. Public institutions have a whole different way of doing this and a different way of thinking about it. Most of them are pretty inexpensive, relatively speaking. Um, I would say it also probably does not happen at the very top of the food chain, where institutions are meeting full demonstrated financial need.
mhm.
Um, not that they don't practice enrollment management, but they may not be in the discounting game because they don't have to be,
Right.
right? So those are a couple of caveats that I would throw in. Betsy made me think about Publix, and I'm going, yeah, that's a whole different world.
Mhm.
But they're still using strategic enrollment management. They just may not be
Yes,
using the tuition discount part of it.
Absolutely.
correct, or certainly not to the same extent.
Mhm.
Right. You think
Although I'm
about all the
seeing,
state schools, right? And they're
yeah,
using some and not others.
yeah,
Mhm.
right. Although I am starting to see some publics get in the merit scholarship game.
Oh, yeah.
This is all made pretty by merit scholarships.
That was my next question. So talk about
That's
that. Because I
yeah,
remember when merit scholarships came into play, and there's always been a discussion of financial need versus merit scholarships. There's merit scholarships taken away from financial need. I mean, there's that tug of war.
yeah. Um, this so the downside of discounting is that it creates an arms race
Mhm.
between institutions. And um, if it helps me get my enrollment, maybe I discount a little more, and that forces that attracts more students to my institution. But that creates pressures on my competitors, and all of a sudden you've got this churn, and that's where you've seen merit scholarships come from. Um, it's a fortunate institution if those merit scholarships are endowed, but
Mhm.
most of it is not endowed. Most of it is um, coming straight from the operating budget and is an offset to tuition. And again, it can get very complicated. Every institution does this a little differently because they have different institutional priorities, because they have different financial circumstances, because they have different markets. Not all markets behave. That's part of enrollment management, is understanding how this segment of your market behaves differently from another segment of your market. I promise you, and everybody on the Zoom call knows it. Uh, high school males and high school females behave differently. Yes.
Yes.
They do.
Yes,
Yes,
they
they do.
do. We know that too. And they behave differently in terms of yield to our institutions, right? So that's something we have to know and to account for somehow.
What about from an international students? How does recruiting an
Um,
international um,
Carey.
students come into
um,
play?
the international applicant pools have exploded in the last few years, although this year they seem to be shrinking dramatically at the schools that I have some knowledge of at this early date. Um, but that has become a completely different thing than it was 20 years ago.
Mhm.
There is this myth of the full pay international student. It is, I assure you, a myth um, at most places. There are still places where, and they tend to be at the top of the food chain, um, where they see plenty of full pay international students. But most institutions that are a rung or two or three below are not seeing that. Um, um, and international students, they're pretty smart, and they have figured out this discounting merit scholarship game as well.
Mhm.
Um, and the social networks, social media networks, I should say, in these countries. Um, so and so got into school X with Y scholarship. I can assure you the next year there will be an explosion of applicants from that country.
Right.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that's another thing to balance. I'm aware of well-known liberal arts colleges that um, that are seeing 40 to 50% of their entire applicant pool be made up of international students these days.
Wow.
And they
Yeah.
behave differently.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then that fits into, you could make up your whole class of students from China or Korea or, one country or another, and then you want to have a more eclectic distribution of students too.
Right.
So that's but I'm sure you've heard the argument of, we're all watching tuition in higher education. I mean, it's outpaced, the cost of tuition has outpaced, cost of living, everything else except probably healthcare. And
Twin parent in college.
exactly. And so why not reduce the tuition and then just have more students pay a fuller tuition amount?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, and one that I think a lot of colleges are thinking about, have thought about. Um, there are a couple things, and I led a trustee group in the last couple of years thinking about this very question. Does it make more sense to cut our tuition in half give less merit scholarship, less financial aid? Does the math work out better? Would we attract a broader pool of students who have um, eliminated us from contention simply because they saw our sticker price, right? So
Mhm.
I mean, that's the question. Um, and it's a good and fair question. There are a couple of things going on here. One, um, we had a hard time finding examples where it worked, quite frankly. That could be because it's institutions that have tried it, probably tried it too late to save themselves. Um, or the practice changed their market.
Mhm.
It changed who they were appealing to. It changed their competition. It changed their institutional perception out there in the marketplace. Those are all pretty weighty questions for an institution to think about. Um, and it's a real challenge for an institution to do it by itself. This would be a whole lot easier if we could get together and talk about it. We can't.
Right,
That's against the federal law.
right, right.
Um, but if school X all of a sudden reduces its tuition, by 50%, it changes the character and nature of the place in ways that may well be unpredictable. And most institutions aren't that brave.
Right. And it prestige, right? The value of what
Correct.
you're purchasing. And
Mhm.
if you're reducing the cost, what's wrong? What's going on there?
Mhm.
And yeah.
It's like, is it a fire sale type of thing?
And people are
Yeah.
making great points about St. John's, right? And Willamette, and Sweetbriar as some examples. Yeah, yeah.
It's
It's a really complicated question on the college side.
Well, and I think, going back to between the public and the private schools, parents like being able to say, hey, my kid got a $30,000 scholarship. Look at me. And it's not nearly as prestigious. You don't have as much bragging rights if you paid less, but you don't get any money. So, that's a psychological aspect to it as well.
Yeah.
I know I had this conversation with a small college here in California, and the dean had told me they had reduced tuition for those reasons. We'll bring more people in, it'll be less. We want to be very transparent, and all of those things happened. And then they went back to raising their tuition because the image and the brand just took a nosedive when they did
Right.
that.
When you think
Right.
about admission offices, these touch points that you have with families, and if you remove that touch point, that really positive, we've read your application, all of those things, and, financial aid is going to give you X amount in merit money, that's a really powerful touch point, and you lose that. And that can really, I mean, the summary ultimately, right, really negatively affect yield as well as reputation, all those other pieces.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got a few questions, and I see the Margot has her hand raised, and I know somebody else had their hand raised. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. So it says here, can you speak about Tulane Northeastern model of EDEA admissions? And that's another aspect of strategic enrollment management is wait list, early action, and early decision, and how that's working, and the fact that many smaller LACs are dispensing with EA and going to rolling admissions. So and we've talked a little bit about the international. She also asked about the international.
Mhm.
But let's
Mhm.
talk about the EDEA, ED1, ED2, EA1, EA2, and then just
Yes.
throw restrictive early action in there, and there you go.
Right. And what Chicago this year is doing ED0 or something like that, or what are they calling it? Um, ED is really important. Every early decision commitment, um, the first thing to understand is that yields vary by round, right? Your early decision round ought to be pretty close to 100% yield. It never is 100%, but it ought to be. But let's say it's 90%. Your early action or regular decision yield, if you are a really good liberal arts college, but probably not in the top 5 or 10, your yield is below 20%, right?
Say that again, Carey. I think that's something people don't realize.
The
And explain
yields
what
of
yield is. Explain what yield
Yes,
is.
yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Yield is the proportion of students who take you up on your offer of admission. So if you admit 100 students and 30 of them come your way and make a deposit, you've got a 30% yield, right? But yields vary by round. And early decision, those are the students that we all know who are applying as a first choice institution, and they're bound to come to you if you admit them. Early action and regular decision yields are much lower. So again, in that example, you offer 100 students in early action or regular decision admission, and only, say, 20 of them come to you. So the motivation or the incentive on the college side is to really bulk up on early decision to the extent that you can, because every offer of admission, early decision, every commitment that you have early decision is 5 offers of admission you don't have to make early action and regular decision. And if you don't have to admit 5 students, your admission staff is not chasing 5 students around trying to convince them to come. You're not offering more aid to 5 students. It allows you to control your fate a bit better, right? So from an institutional standpoint, you might see some funny behavior in early decision that you don't see in early action or regular decision. And by that, I mean making some offers of admission that they might not otherwise make. Again, top of the food chain, that's a different world. Big flagship publics, that's a different world. Um, although some of those incentives are at play at those places as well, right? They may just be at a different strata of the market, and this is a highly stratified market. I think of it as little layers of students. And this layer is attracted to these colleges, and this layer is attracted to those colleges. And getting students to move between those layers is pretty hard. Um, I do expect, I think, Cyndy, you mentioned that you're starting to see some movement from some institutions away from precipice admission, deadline admission, toward more rolling admission. I think that will probably intensify in the next few years for a number of different reasons. And we can talk about demographics and all sorts of things if we want. Um, but those are that's part of the equation that you have to consider in a strategic enrollment management environment.
And I would add that as counselors, we're advising families. Let's just an example of a public institution that the top local students are applying to, that often get deferred early action because the college expects that those kids are shooting for an Ivy or a top tiered. And so the whole conversation about yield protection comes
Mhm.
in as counselors,
Mhm.
as we're talking, because colleges often won't admit to yield protecting, right,
Right.
Carey? Yeah. But
Probably.
as counselors, we know that that's what's going on, right? That they don't tend to yield those top kids at X institution, so they're not going to offer them a spot in that first early round, unless it's early decision, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's another piece of sort of strata that as counselors we have to pay attention to as we understand what's going on at these various schools.
Well, and that leads to demonstrated interest too, correct? Because you've got to show that you're not, and that's where the explosion of the Common App and how many colleges can be on the Common App, both public and private. And just because you can check a box and say, hey, I'm going to add my name to this college university list, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're really interested in that school. So why should they chase you as one of those five when they want to admit people that are demonstrate that they know and love that school and that's it's a real viable application. But yeah, when they're protecting their yield, that can get really, really, like, why did the student not get in? It's like, and then on the opposite side, we saw this happen last year, and you're seeing more and more of it now is direct admissions straight from the Common App, and now public universities, University of Utah. I mean, we're doing that here in California. That you just automatically get admitted, and I mean, community colleges have been like that forever. But that's another side of this strategic enrollment management process, right?
Yep.
Right.
And there's a psychological impact there for a student to say, know that, hey, there is a university that wants me, a college that wants me, especially before they start getting the rejections. That can be really powerful.
They often forget how good that feels, though, as soon as they start getting rejections. Remember, you got into X school? No, I don't care. I don't want to go there.
Exactly. That must not be a good school if they're going to admit me. We have to deal with that kind of psychology too.
Yes. The Groucho Marx approach to college admission.
So someone else says, I've heard that in general, what the real cost of tuition is closer to an in-state university cost than anything else. And therefore, that is why they can give merit aid and give that institutional discount. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
What the real cost at the institution is similar or comparable to.
I've seen that with some local schools.
Yeah, I think that it's probably a more complicated answer to that question. I would need the accountants to be in the room, really, to think that through. The colleges think about the cost of education all the time. And colleges are very expensive places to run. So it probably depends on what you're counting and maybe some of the definitions. So I don't know that I would buy into that completely. If our tuition is 50,000 and the cost of education is 40, that other 10,000 goes into program development. It goes into raises for the faculty. It goes into a whole lot of things.
New housing.
And colleges are, this is not the family budget. Colleges are trying to build up reserves for the future. They're not for profit organizations, but they want to come into the black every year.
I love how you're thinking about that, Carey, from your perspective. I think from the college advisor, college counseling perspective, what we see, and I see it here in Michigan, is that some of the private institutions here in the state of Michigan will discount their tuition or give merit aid so that the cost of attending that private college equals what it would cost to attend the local public, hoping that that lures them into this private school maybe with different resources. So that's what we're seeing. I think that's what the question ultimately was about. And
that's just another form of discounting.
Right, of course.
Right.
That's just discounting in a different way of thinking about that.
And it's a smart way to do it, right?
Sure.
They really want the smaller private school. So yeah, it is exactly that. But that's what we tend to see and
Yes.
not think about the different gymnastics that you have to do
Yes, that
in
makes
the
perfect
VC.
sense. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is the key thing for just college admissions. And that's been the case for, you know, over 30 years is being able to understand you can still afford a private school education and maybe it's at the same cost as a public school education where the family would foot the bill for a public school education, but then they get the difference through merit scholarships or need-based scholarships at the private university. I had, and I've shared this story before, but I was at a point where I was going to have to drop out of the University of Colorado Boulder because they no longer gave me financial aid. And a friend said, "Well, here, why don't you come visit this school?" It was 600 miles away. It was a small private liberal arts college in Missouri, but it cost 3 times as much. Like, well, if I can't afford this one, how in the world am I going to afford this? And I'm like, well, I have nothing to lose. So I went and talked to them and they offered me all this financial aid and I didn't have to drop out of college. And so I can testify what a difference that can make and what an impact it can have to go from that public university to, the private. So,
And it's our
um,
part of our job is to make sure that we're presenting all of these different options to
mhm.
parents. It was less expensive for one of my sons to go to a private school out in Southern California than it was to go to the University of Michigan.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
always say that to parents. Don't immediately say no to these schools. I recommend Gettysburg and Rhodes all the time because I know for the most part they're going to be less expensive than some of these flagship state universities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where understanding this and helping families to understand this, it's not just because a lot of times family open the book and they'll say, "Oh, well, here's the tuition." They just close it and say,
Never
no,
mind. Yep.
no go. Well, once they understand all these different moving parts and we can help them, um, look at it, then that makes a big difference. So Stephanie posed a question. I've seen her post it twice. So I want to address this. And she brings up a really good point. What is the effect of the number of students needing academic remediation and developing executive fund prepared?
Hmm.
How does that impact the overall goals and priorities of the?
Yeah, Cindy, could you repeat that? You froze
Yeah,
a
for some reason
critical
my
moment.
What is the effect of number of students needing academic remediation and developing executive functioning skills? So that's the question in terms of, academic goals. If you bring in students who aren't qualified so that you get the yield that you want, then how do you make sure that they can succeed over those 4 years? I'm presuming.
Well, from my point of view, you don't bring in students that can't do the work, period. You need to work on your yield for the students who can. That might put additional pressure on your discounting because you need to yield those students, right? None of us should be admitting or enrolling students who we do not believe can do the work. We don't, I mean, the ethic for this in me is you don't waste people's money and you don't waste people's time. Those are
Mhm.
two things they cannot get back. So there's as we talk about the balancing of all these numbers and segments and the money and so forth, it still is, to my way of thinking, and certainly the way I've always approached it, there's still a critically important ethical foundation that it needs to be built upon, right? Um, so, if you are an institution that has resources that can support students, that's one thing, and do it well, that's one thing. If you are an institution that doesn't have that kind of resource at a grand scale, then you have some different institutional priorities, and which is fine. Every institution gets to set their own priorities. So I don't know if I'm actually answering the question very well, but to the way Cindy you framed it, again, it comes down to institutional priorities. Uh,
Mhm.
and if you admit them, you have a duty and responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, to support them.
Right.
Mhm.
And so if someone like me who's dyslexic applies to X school and gets admitted to X school because the admission office believes that I can do the work, and I arrive on campus and I need these support systems, is that general need for these support systems increasing on campus? And how does that impact financial health, the financial health of the institution, and pulling maybe resources away from other things? Right? So we need more
Sure.
people to staff the writing center. We need more people to staff, the math center, not just because I've arrived on campus, but because there's always going to be a cohort of people like me with neurodivergence who don't necessarily talk about that in our application because we're afraid to. But
Right.
we arrive on campus, you've admitted us, we can do the work, but now we need help and support. And how does that then impact the distribution of money and institutional priorities?
Yeah. And that opens up a whole nother conversation
Doesn't it?
with our neurodivergence. So we're going to save that for another day. Um, but you can tell this is, these are all topics that are ongoing. There's many, many aspects to it. And we've, just like our title said, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. But if you have other questions, are there resources, are there sources that you would recommend people go to learn more about this? And I'm going to put all of this on my website and on the show notes as well.
I'm going to ask one last question because somebody just asked a really important question, and I would love for Carey to respond to this or for answers to be on the website about, do you suggest that families disclose what their students' needs are in their application, and doesn't that impact decisions that are made? My response is anything you disclose on the application can impact decisions that are made. Anything. And so I would treat that no differently. The way I handle it is to say, always disclose because colleges need to understand what they're getting.
I think that's fair, and what I would generally agree. If there's some hesitancy on the part of the family, um, uh, and they don't wish to disclose before an offer of admission is made, they should do so immediately after an offer of admission is made, and well before they consider making a deposit. Right? Again, they need to understand what resources the college really has.
Mhm.
But I'm with you. It's the nobody wins if we're not honest with each other in terms of our needs and wants and goals and desires. Um, and nobody wins. And um, if a certain school doesn't work out, you know what? There are a bunch of other great schools. There really are. Take a breath. Tell those families to take a breath. And I'm married to a college counselor, so I understand how hard it is to say to a family, take a breath, it's going to be fine. They don't always want to hear that, but that is the truth.
But also, if you have worries about your child, while your child is on the tour, you go to student services and ask questions about
Sure, great
how do
idea.
you manage mental health questions? How do you manage, kids with dyslexia or need executive functioning help? Let your kid tour, you go ferret out those answers on that visit. And that's a great job for a parent.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree.
Sorry, we pushed you over.
Yeah. I want to reiterate what you just said, Carey. It doesn't do anybody any good. If you need financial aid, mark down financial aid. If you need support, mark down support. Why would you want to get into a school that's not going to offer you what you need? And why would you want to get in a school you can't afford? That line of approach has never made any sense to me whatsoever. So we've got great, Stephanie's asking questions. She's got some great questions here, but we are out of time. So if you have further questions, please feel free to send me an email, or I'll make emails available on the website. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Carey, for being here today. We could spend another hour talking about this, obviously. And we're going to, next week, I'm going to have Jeff Neal. He's going to come talk about AI literacy for adults. This got rescheduled from a couple of weeks ago, so we're offering it next week. And then December 5th, we're going to talk about AI literacy for students. And Emily Pacheco is going to join me December 19th, and we're going to talk about AI in college admissions. It's called AI in 2035. So look forward to those. You'll be getting emails about that. And thank you. I have the best audience of all. Thank you all for being here. I know this is such a busy time for you to take an hour out during this few days before November 1st, I think is just phenomenal. So thank you. And Betsy, thank you. Carey, thank you. And
Thank you, Cyndy. Thanks,
Thank you,
Carey.
Cyndy.
everybody have a great weekend.